Welcome to Noble Warrior Life. This is a place where entrepreneurs talk about what it takes to create and scale purpose-driven organizations. We're going to talk about mindset. We're going to talk about mental models. We're going to talk about actionable tactics such that you can go out and scale your purpose-driven organization. My next guest is a nationally renowned expert in integrative women's health. She helps women transition through important phases of their life, from being born all the way up to, the end of life. She's on a mission to explore what it means to be a woman in this time and this age. Welcome, Dr. Suzanne.
Okay, thanks for having me.
We're in an interesting time right now. As someone who helps women go through different phases in life, what are some of the questions that keeps coming up as they consult you for advice?
Well, a lot of the questions are the same questions that they ask all the time. Obviously certain things have been heightened, and I think there's been a lot of attention placed on impact on birth from the pandemic and coronavirus. And so I think probably the majority of the questions I'm getting from patients are around that and how they can stay safe and sane at the same time. And then what are the specifics? How is a hospital birth going to be different than it would have been 6 weeks ago? Very specific things, and things have been changing a lot. The number of people that we allow into the birth are now limited. We only have one support person. For a while here in Los Angeles, for 2 weeks in our institution, we were not allowing those people, or the institution was not allowing those people to go with the mom to the postpartum recovery area. They had to leave within a couple of hours, which I had a lot of questions about. I didn't really understand what the science behind that was, and that got lifted. I think famously in New York City, for a while, even partners weren't even allowed in the birthing suite. That's changed, and in fact, Governor Cuomo has gone as far to, as I think this last weekend or last week, to talk about allowing birth support like doulas and non-professionals into the birthing suite as well, because we know that it has a really positive impact. So things are kind of in flux and around birth, and I think that's getting a lot of play. But I'm still getting the same questions and problems that I always get, whatever the physical or psychological issue is for my patients are still happening. One of the things that's also happened is that I think people made a lot of assumptions about my availability to them, or their doctor's availability in general to them. And even this morning, somebody texted me, which that's a whole other story, but she texted me like, I have an appointment scheduled. Should I still come? People are just like, don't know what's happening. Like, nobody knows what's happening. So there's an added extra layer of stress on top of whatever is going on with them, which is like everybody in every area. This is not anything different. But I'm in a weird position because I'm technically a frontline healthcare provider, because when I'm in the hospital and doing births and things like that, that is considered frontline actually. But then a lot of the other things that I do were stopped temporarily, and it's just very unclear. Like, things are starting to come back here, like elective surgeries and things like that, but very on a limited basis. So it's just weird. It's a weird limbo for all of us. And yet life goes on and people's health continues to exist.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So how do you think, because you're a business owner, right? You're one of the partners in your practice.
Yes.
So how do you think this changes? Because let me actually backtrack for a moment. So let me set a little context. So this COVID thing happened, and it impacted a lot of different industries.
Yes.
Hotels, to travel, to events, to conferences, all kinds of places where basically people gather, right? And the very nature of your profession is bringing new life into the world. So that's where people gather.
And lots of people into our office too. Our waiting room was infamous actually, for being overcrowded and kind of drama filled because of it. So obviously that's not happening at all, because we can't have people near each other. We can't be near each other,
Right. So how do you think this going forward is impacting your business, your industry, your colleagues, and so on and so forth?
It's
in
having a
your
huge impact. It is going to, it is going to have a lasting impact on how healthcare is delivered. First of all, I think there is a different level of awareness of how things work in this country, and to call it a system is ridiculous. And anybody who wants to call it a system at this point, I mean, they're not paying attention, because all of us who are in the system were aware that it's not a system. Now everybody's aware of the system. And this is not meant to disparage my colleagues who are both in administration and trying to keep things together and serve the public and take care of people and literally save lives, or to my colleagues who are really on the front lines in the ICUs, in the emergency departments, all that. Like, they're doing amazing jobs. So I hope that people can continue to appreciate that side of it too, which is that people don't go into medicine to make money. Okay. People go into medicine because they have a passion to care for other people with, at times, with great sacrifice to themselves, physically, morally, and financially. Okay. So
so
that's the
actually
one side. And now so I'm in more of the sector. I'm in a hybrid situation, because as a private practitioner, I'm a business owner, and I own a business that employs a little under 50 people. Okay. So it's a small business, right? But for a medical practice that's privately owned, it's pretty big. But I interface a lot in the hospital, because a lot of what I do is hospital based: surgeries, deliveries, right? So where anything that wasn't an essential treatment was being held. Well, we've taken, I would say my practice personally, like the patients I see, it's at least 50% down, which is 50% of my income, right? Or more, maybe,
Oh,
so,
sorry. Actually, let me interject real quick.
yeah.
50% down because people are scared to go to any hospitals, any government.
So not for the hospital. Okay, so for hospitalizations that are required, those people have to come in. So if you're having a baby and you continue to decide that you're going to have the baby in the hospital, that's going to happen. There's nobody stopping that. Nobody can stop that.
Right.
My surgeries, unless they were emergency surgeries, I wasn't doing any surgery. So I've done, since the pandemic hit, I've done probably 3 surgeries, and they had to be done. That's why I did them. Otherwise, nobody was having surgery. Most of my surgeries are not really elective, but they're not generally an emergency-based surgery that can be put off. Those will start to happen again. And that's not really a huge, it's a part of my practice. It's not a huge part of my income. But people coming into the office, if you were just coming in for your annual, but you had a couple things you wanted to talk with me, that's not happening, right? Those people aren't going to come in, not only just because they're scared, but because that's not considered essential, and it's not kosher to be doing it.
Mm-hmm.
So, in our county and in our state and in the city of Beverly Hills, where my office is, there are restrictions on that, and it's for people's safety. I wouldn't flout that. I mean, why would I want to bring you in when you really just are having your pap smear? So here are 2 things that, and I think this is an addition. This is some of what's going to change going forward in medicine. So one, everybody's now aware there's no system, and it's a hot mess, in my opinion. Okay. I don't think it serves people very well. Sorry. Number 2, private practices are private businesses, and they are taking a large financial hit. And those practices that can't pivot, that don't have depth, that don't have creativity, that don't have some resources and reserves, are going to die. There are private practitioners I predict who will go out of business this year. That'll be it. They will shutter their practice. That's enormous, huge, sad, not good for them, not good for their employees, not good for their patients, because those people will get absorbed largely into the larger hospital systems, and there are some issues there. But the other side of it is things like telemedicine. So I'm doing a lot more telemedicine. It's exhausting. It's draining. I'm learning a lot about myself and
Wait,
what I
why is
actually like
that?
to do.
Actually, can you
Okay, so let me tell you what that is. So
yeah.
telemedicine and telehealth have sort of been on the radar in the background probably 30, 40 years. And it's where you and the patient are not together. You are having a video like this, you're doing a video conference. There are different variants, like in large systems, like the prisons do a ton of this, right? So doctors can be contracted and taken care of, for instance, a specialized practice like HIV. without going physically to 14,000 locations, they can do, there are people on site who do certain things, and then the doctor and the decision maker, maybe some diagnostics are occurring elsewhere. So it really does serve a large population of people very, very efficiently. It requires a lot of technology for that kind of a system. I'm obviously not doing that, but I can see my patients, like if you have a complaint that doesn't require me to put my hands on you, and I do mean put my hands on you because you can show me things on your body. There's a camera. But if I need to feel or, do some diagnostic testing, I can't do that. But the rest of it I can do this way. And I'm doing that. And a lot of my patients have elected to do that. And that's something that I think is really good for medicine. I think it's going to make it more efficient. I think it's going to make it more attractive. You're not leaving your office, driving across town, paying for parking, sitting in my way. I mean, it's like a 3-hour thing to have 15 minutes with me,
Mm-hmm.
maybe.
Mm-hmm. So
It's
you said,
better.
but you
It's better
said,
for both of us.
but you say it's tiring. And what's the not so good thing about
Well,
telemedicine?
I mean, for me, I'm used to doing things a certain way. I've been doing it for 20 years. First of all, I can see more patients, in the office. Boom, boom, boom. I also am up and moving. I'm a very hyperactive person. I chose this field because I don't like to sit on my ass.
I
So
see.
when I'm doing a teleconference, I am sitting on my ass. And it's just, there's something about this that's like draining.
I
I mean,
see.
everybody's been talking about it who doesn't normally do this. Like, in some ways it's awesome. In some ways, just like your brain gets zapped after sitting in front of the computer talking to people. It's just different. It's okay. It's not going to kill
I
me.
see. I see. So it's more of a user interface type thing because it's draining, as you said, sitting in front of a computer. But forward looking, right? One of the things that is being talked about is what if you have like a window like looking thing where you can actually do a device. It's as if you're talking to someone through a clear window or things like that. Would that be helpful or
I don't
so?
know. I mean, I think a lot of it is that you just don't know till you're doing it. And it's just different. It's just different. It's not like I come home from a busy day at the office and I'm not tired. I mean, I am. There's a lot of energy that's being exchanged between humans.
Mhm.
And, this is just different. It's just like a different way of experiencing a relationship because a lot of what medicine and healing and diagnostics are, I mean, there's definitely science, but there's a lot of art, and a lot of that is like the sort of the personal exchange that is occurring between
Mm,
the
mm,
people. I mean, for me, it's a very important part of what I do because I walk in the room and I'm already like, I'm going to get a vibe from a person. So like, I see their body language, like there's certain things that I'll pick up on and I'll ask that have nothing to do with what they said they're here for, or that their chart said, or that they told my, medical assistant. Like I walk in and I'm like, what's going on? You know?
mhm,
So it's just different. It's just a
mm,
different part of my brain.
So
But I think
not
that this is here to stay, and I think it's good. I think this is here to stay. And that's going to talk about like downstream effects of commercial real estate.
mhm,
Do we really need to have as much real estate as we have? I mean, maybe we
mhm,
won't need to eventually.
mhm, mhm,
Staffing
mhm,
it's going to have a big impact, long-term impact. Things are going to change in the
mhm.
economy. Obviously, everybody knows that, but I really strongly predict that it will change very much so in my field as well.
Yeah. Okay, so let's talk about that for a moment since we're on that topic. So say this continues another 3 months, let's say, or 6 months or whatever, right? So what are some of the industry trends that you can kind of predict already? All right, so we're gonna shrink down commercial real estate. We're not gonna have as many staff. And
Yeah.
then what else? Like in terms of how you provide care for your patients coming in. Let's say now it's no longer Beverly Hills proper, and then more people are coming to you from elsewhere. I mean, I don't know. So what are some of the
Well, yeah,
things
so
that you
some
can
of the
see?
some of the regulations that have been on the books for decades that the telemedicine community was trying to fight against, I only became aware of it recently because I was sort of interested in it anyways, because I have my conventional private practice that I'm a partner in, but I've always taught. I have the integrative stuff. I do it in the office, but a lot of it was a little bit separate. It was more on the teaching and writing side, and I was always like, is there a way that I could bring that in more, but have them a little bit separate? And so I was sort of like interested in it. And when this happened, I was like on it, like, and I was like, oh, okay, we got to start doing this. It's going to be a way we can continue to serve our patients. And, so I started learning. And what I learned is that they've been trying to get away with this, the changes like reimbursement from insurance, practicing across state lines. Like there's lots of things that right now are lifted on an emergency basis, but I think the genie's out of the bottle. So I think for a lot of us, it will be attractive. And like you said, like I'm already planning on opening my practice to anybody, like because before it wasn't clear to me if it was going to be legal for me to see you in Arizona without having seen you first physically. Well, that's not a thing anymore. I can
Mm,
open my practice to anybody in the United States who wants to do a telehealth. I do a lot of menopause work. A lot of that can be done this way. A lot of it, the majority of it.
mm,
And so there's opportunities for a lot of people. But like I said, I think people who have a certain way that they do things are less creative, are older, whatever, have a more procedure based practice. I think it's gonna hurt. I think
mm,
it's gonna hurt. And I think we're gonna lose some of these people,
mm,
which means people are gonna I think there's gonna be a shift in the way people access. Because the other thing is that in some ways, this provides a lot more access for patients to meet, but not if you live on a reservation where I was listening to NPR this morning and they were talking about how they're providing free Wi-Fi hotspots on reservations because even if there's internet access, people can't afford it. Right?
mm,
So these people are underserved terribly as it is.
mm, mm, mm,
And creating opportunities online still is not creating opportunities for people without access
mm,
necessarily.
mm,
And I think it's going to highlight, I think, a lot of the disparities that people experience in access to care and then in outcomes are going to be highlighted and already have. I mean, I feel like some of them are getting brushed under the rug a little bit, but there's all sorts of data indicating that people of color are suffering much worse from COVID and have much higher death rates. Not that
mm.
every color is poor, but we do have a lot of people of color in this country who are poor and who don't
Right.
have access. And,
One
so
of
this,
the things that always inspire me every time I interact with you is you have so much heart. You care so much about a lot of different things, right?
yeah,
You care about
I
women's
do.
health. You care about sustainability. You care about giving access to the less privileged, right? So that's very apparent for anyone that pays a little bit of attention. They're like, oh yeah, Dr. Suzanne has a huge heart. So segue back to sort of the origin story. Have you always operated like this? Was there a moment where you made a choice in your life where you said, no, I'm going to pursue medicine. I'm going to stand for women's health. I'm going to provide health care for others?
It's a series of decisions. And I think, now that I'm getting older, like maybe there are specific times that I can look back on. I think when you're in them, it's not always obvious, but some of this is just a long history of being just kind of a sensitive child. I was like a sensitive kid and I was like sort of the person that everybody would like confide in. So that had some kind of an influence because it made me feel good to be able to listen and to help people. And my dad's a doctor.
Oh,
So
okay.
yeah.
Family
And
business. All right.
yeah, kind of. I mean, he's a psychoanalyst, which is interesting because, I do have a tendency to look at the whole person, like not pieces, parts, which is maybe why I was attracted to women's health because I feel like there's more opportunity. I felt like more opportunity for me to be holistic in my approach to people. So I definitely grew up in a household where these kinds of things were valued and they weren't even necessarily talked about, but like demonstrated, like my dad grew up, in a kind of poor household and my grandparents were immigrants and, there's a lot of like that kind of that like make it to America story that definitely was talked about. Like if we lived in a small town, we'd be the richest people in town, that kind of stuff. You know how lucky you are. That was the kind of stuff I got growing up. Meanwhile, I had everything. I had everything. I grew up in Beverly Hills. I had a very privileged background. I traveled the entire world. My parents are big world travelers. They're not together for many years. They still are huge travelers. So that was the other thing is I saw the world very early and I saw like, oh, people have different kinds of lives. People eat different food. Like I saw that everybody isn't the same and that, it's really beautiful, and I think I learned to appreciate difference. So these things influenced me. And then I actually didn't think I was going to go to medical school. I did a liberal arts education at a really wonderful institution called Wesleyan University, which is prized for the watchword in those days was diversity. This is the 80s. and also kind of like a very integrative approach, like a lot of critical thinking and learning how to learn and loving learning and all that stuff. And so I was very much encouraged academically. And I think that has had a really lasting impression. Like my major was social psychology, I had a joint major in sociology and psychology, and I had a minor in art history. And I wrote a thesis on an artist and his social cycle thing. I mean, like that was like very Wesleyan, very Wesleyan. Like I made up my own thing basically, and was told like, that's what you should do. You should approach life that way. So I think having that, like feeling like I wanted to do things differently and be creative, and having adults and mentors around me say, yes, that's what you should do. Like that made a big difference, right? Because I've never done it the way I was supposed to do it. I didn't even do pre-med. I didn't do pre-med. And then I left college and I was like, I don't really like working for people.
That's obvious.
I mean, I can, but I really don't enjoy it.
Yeah.
And I went back and did a post-bac pre-med. So that's the other thing too. There's never one way to do it. There's always another opportunity. The road is winding. It's not like I so didn't get into medical school the way I was supposed to do it. I was out of college for 4 years. I worked, I did research, I worked in a free clinic. There's a through line, right? Like I really liked helping people for the sake of helping them. You know, and not because I'm so awesome, but you know, you get a lot out of it. When you give, you get what you give. So, you know, when I got into medical school, I was at USC at LA County, and that was really interesting because I was like, oh, everybody isn't here for the same reason. What? I was like so idealistic, CK, so idealistic. But then I got to work with these amazing patients at LA County who I felt were so generous. It was like, you don't even know me. You're really like, this is scary. You're sick. You're poor. I felt like they were the most generous people I'd ever met, and so kind. And
How come? Like how? What?
because they would let me in. Like that's so private. That's so like it's your body, it's your health, and it's like people were so vulnerable, and I think my authenticity and my just being real like really paid off because people trusted me. And then I got a lot of like, and there's like some cultural stuff too, but you know, a lot of Central Americans and Mexican Americans, and you know, it's a county hospital. It's one of the biggest county hospitals in the world. It was just a crazy jumble. And people who didn't even speak Spanish, like they spoke some native, you know, tongue that I didn't, you know, I was like, this person's from Mexico. Okay. Like they were native. They didn't speak the Mexican Spanish that I learned, you know, and we just somehow figured it out. And I got a lot of love from these patients. And I got a lot of like, God is working through you, that kind of stuff, which I really
pause for a moment.
Yeah.
God is working through me. How old were you when you kind of learned that and then embody it? Or
in my 20s. It was in my 20s. And I heard that and I was like, At first you're just like, oh, cool. This is this person's belief system and I'm here to help provide comfort. And then as I got older, I was like, interesting. Not in charge.
Yeah.
Seems to me getting a lot of information about that. Because as a physician and I'm a surgeon, like you're in charge. You're the authority. And it's a weird balance because you have to have that confidence. I have to have confidence. I don't want to gross people out, but to cut people open and, you know, have somebody over there, put them to sleep, and I'm going to cut them open, take things out, put them back together, and they're going to wake up and they'll be fine. They'll be better than ever. Like that's crazy. That's a crazy thing to do. But I think as I got older, I really realized like, and talk about purpose, right? So my purpose really was, I have some kind of innate gift and skill set and talent, and I've worked very hard to hone those skills, be really good at it, and have a level of integrity that I'm comfortable with. But there is definitely a part of it that it has nothing to do with me. I don't understand it. I don't need to understand it. But it does drive me because it gives me a purpose. So, you know, you mentioned my integrative background. I have a background in Ayurveda, which is the holistic traditional medical system of India, similar to Chinese medicine. And I think people know a lot about yoga, which is part of it.
Which one's better in your eyes?
Are you really good at really?
Well, I mean,
what is this, like Team Ayurveda?
No. I'm asking that question jokingly, right?
Because I know you are. I know.
It is essentially like a thought system, and
they're very similar though,
right? So,
and if you look historically, they grew up around the same time. They're different. I think I think Chinese medicine in this country is more regimented and it's regulated. So I think if you look
Mm,
at, is there like a level of aptitude and skill that is recognizable? Yeah, Chinese medicine wins for sure in the United States because Ayurveda isn't regulated here. But Ayurveda to me appealed to me.
because
Probably because I came from meditation and yoga and I just found Ayurveda. But they're very similar. They're very similar in terms of their approach to the mind body system and how people live and lifestyle management and the impact of spirituality and our relationship with nature and the seasons and ourselves. And so the word dharma is probably going to be familiar to a lot of people that follow you.
mm.
And that is your purpose. That is your purpose here. And I believe in that. I believe that I have a dharma. It's evolving. It's not always been the same or will be the same, but I believe that it exists and it does drive me.
So quick question. There's so many directions because
I know I'm like, did I even
yeah,
answer
you
what you asked
basically
me?
condense, decades of your experiences in
Well,
like
it's hard.
20
Yeah.
minutes, right? So what I'll ask you is this. As a Western doctor, surgeon, right? How do you present yourself? How do you balance yourself from the holistic medicine Ayurveda versus the Western approach? And then how do you kind of reconcile that internally and how do you present that externally?
You know, some of it I just, like I said, I've always had a tendency to just sort of do what I think is the best thing to do anyway. So it's sort of like, well, I just do it because it makes sense to me. And if it doesn't make sense to you, that's fine. You could go elsewhere. I mean, really, like if it seems weird to you, then you're probably not a good fit for me. Having
Mhm.
said that, one of my favorite things about Ayurveda specifically is that they love to talk about the history of the medicine. And famously, one of the most important scholars in Ayurveda, Shushruta, was a surgeon. So, in Ayurveda, as in most medical systems, like everything can't be handled the same way. And sometimes you do have to do surgery. So that's just kind of, now I was already a surgeon and doing it, but I was like, oh, cool. Okay, that works. So I've kind of glommed onto that thought. But I think that's just, it's because that's my practical side. I mean, I think people make an assumption that if you have some kind of involvement with a holistic traditional medical system, then it's all woo. Well, that's not true. I mean, the ancient physicians of China and India and everywhere else, because there was medicine everywhere, all over the planet, there always has. That was the science that was available to them at the time.
Mhm.
And what's interesting, I mean, I could go off on a whole thing about this. It's pretty fascinating. And one of the things that I really loved when I first started studying was like they kind of nailed it before they were doing dissections about how the body works. It's pretty wild. Like it was like, whoa, that's actually what happens. Like very subtle systems like what we would call immunity or the way the blood system works or the nervous system. Like they were right. They had language about it. So that appealed to me, I think. But I mean, like I said, like I'm very much, we talked about this before, like I'm very much heart and mind. And I think that is, science and intuition or art. And that's discussed in conventional medicine also. That's the bedside manner, or I think that's the best way you would see it,
I
or
see. So it's just a different language. The
yeah, it's just different
concepts are all
language.
there, just different
Totally.
language, different nuance about
And
how
I
you
have a different bag of tricks. I have a deeper bag of tricks. I have pharma. I have, my surgeries, I have procedures. I have meditation, breath work, herbs, lifestyle stuff. Ayurveda talks a lot about aligning your practices with your particular unique constitution and the environment in which you are living, which includes seasonal change. I think, which is sustainability I was always into, but that they all go together. That's one of the reasons that sustainability and trying to be as in harmony with our environment as possible is so, so, so important to me. And, we met because of the work we're doing in the, whatever calling it the Mafia for Good, the COVID Crush Hackathon, whatever. And immediately I saw that connection for me too. And I think it's really helped me to think differently about problems and solutions, and what we talked about was that I felt like our reliance on single use products in healthcare is a disaster. And it's been a disaster in this pandemic, specifically with PPE. It's a very, very specific failure. and it's widespread. And this is another thing that I'd love to see change. We'll see if that happens. We're working toward it.
So, as someone who is a innovator, a disruptor, one may say, of industries and of thought, how do you go about? Because there's again a few different things that we could talk about. One of the things that I heard is because of the patients not going to the hospitals because they're scared, and therefore hospitals are not looking at layoffs and stop hiring contract
Yeah.
medical staff. If not now, then 3 months from now, because they're over capacity, basically, right?
Yeah, depending on, I know at our institution, it's a huge institution. I have to say, I'm pretty impressed with how adept they've been at being creative, but I know that they moved a lot of staff from one area to another in order to keep them employed. I mean, I can't remember the numbers, but I think Cedars employs like 10,000 people. It's like a
Right.
village.
That's a lot of people, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So on the systems level, that's what's happening as a way to meet the demand and supply, right? Kind of right in the
Right.
middle. So as someone who is a systems thinker like you are, when you're thinking about single-use PPEs, or you're thinking about, hey, these waves are coming in 3 months
Mm-hmm.
time,
Mm-hmm.
where our current practice, our friends' current practice is over capacity, then how do you kind of navigate your thoughts such that you can act, be in the systems level rather than just on the individual level or on the business owner level?
Yeah, it's hard because like my focus has been on my practice with my partners, and really it's really interesting because normally we'd be having a quarterly strategic, planning meeting, right? And we did that in January. And now we literally, I mean, just to like we have a call schedule that is for this month only. This is totally different than where we were in January. We were planning for like, what's the year's plan and where are we putting the money and what are we going to invest in and what are we going to not invest in and how are we going to expand? How are we going to grow the business? Like that. Okay. So we actually are not, we're like actually much like people are in general right now, living on more of a day-to-day basis, which is interesting and weird. I don't have my institutional experiences are more as a professional lay leader. And I think, but my experience as a person, kind of getting through my own crises. I mean, I've had many more since, getting into medical school, has been to be creative and think outside the box. And that's why I think having people getting together with different perspectives, like we've been doing, is really, really crucial, because you're going to have one perspective as an entrepreneur and having experience in social entrepreneurship, and then the guy who's the supply chain manager is going to have an experience here and a perspective here, and the engineer and the designer, and then you need the healthcare people, because what do we need on the ground? Who's the person that you need to talk to? How do we generally use things? This is not going to be, I think the solutions, and I can talk about it in healthcare, the solutions in healthcare are not going to come, I think, directly out of healthcare only minds. I just don't think it's going to work. I mean, if we want same old, then that's what's going to happen, because they're doing a great job at that, but they're not necessarily out of the box thinkers. Not having been involved intimately in the top leadership at my institution that I attend at Cedars-Sinai Medical Center, I can't tell you what's really been going down. I can tell you that I think they've done an outstanding job, because they did have to turn things around, this huge cruise ship, really rapidly. And yeah, there were a lot of issues in the beginning, and I got to have personal experience with that, like, wow, some stuff that I was like, what? But,
Like
they
what?
were,
What kind of things?
I got exposed. I had a patient who actually had coronavirus very, very early, like right before everything went bonkers, right? And so just the whole experience of like, as soon as I found out, talking to the Department of Health, figuring out what I'm supposed to do, feeling very much like they had no idea what I was supposed to do. And I'm talking, this is like early mid-March, right? And I was like, it just was really disconcerting. I was like, who's the authority? Nobody knows what's going on. Okay. 10 days after exposure, I got a cold. So I was told, get to 14 days, you're good to go. I got day 10, I got sick. So now I had to go get tested. And even then, it was like nobody knew just figuring out what I was supposed to do was very complicated. I ultimately got tested in employee health services at Cedars because even though I'm an employee, I'm an attending. And, at that point, this is like March 24th, like nobody could test. So I went to Cedars, got tested. If you've heard anybody call it a brain biopsy, it feels like a brain biopsy. It's really bad. And it was very
Because they
stressful.
stick it, the thing out.
Dude, they stick it so far in there. And I've had babies come out of me, okay? So I was like, at least that was only 5 seconds because I was like, you're just crying. It was so painful and like automatic, because something gets stuffed up your nose, you cry. I
Oh
was
my
like, oh,
God.
it was so stressful. And then I was quarantined. Like I was isolated from my family. I have a converted garage. I lived out there. And I found out 5 days later that I probably shouldn't say this, but the Department of Health had picked up those labs and they got mishandled and they were all lost. Every single person who got tested that day. So we had to come back
Oh
and get
man,
retested.
go through that again. Oh
And not
man.
just that, I was like, well, do I have it or not? Like, what do I do? Am I living away? I was like, did I expose my family? Did I expose other patients? Like, oh my God, just like, this was right in the beginning when everybody was kind of freaking out anyways. And it
Mm,
was like, oh, this just shows me like nobody knows what they're doing. Like they're
mm,
doing the best they can.
mm,
Now, I don't want people to lose confidence in the Department of Health or in Cedars-Sinai Medical Center. They have since that time really gotten it together. And I have to say, even during it, their communication was okay. Like they were like, this happened, nobody knows what's happening right now. But that was a real wake up call. And I think when I was asked and invited to participate in this thing that we do, initially I was like, oh, it's one more thing. And Karen, has a way with getting people involved. But I was drawn to it because, like I said, I knew that I had something to offer, and I felt like the solutions are going to only come from collaborating and thinking creatively, talking
mm.
to people who have a completely different worldview. I don't know what the solutions are, but I know that that's the only way they're going to happen. If we want to make changes, that's been the only way it's worked for me in my life, actually.
Mm, mm. Yeah, actually, walk us through sort of your mental models now. Someone else listening to this, they're in the middle of pivoting right now.
Yeah.
Their old model doesn't work anymore. That they know their core offerings, they know who they are. They have a sort of an idea of what their purpose is because they're listening to my podcast, right?
Right. Or at
So
least they're interested.
yeah, they're interested. They're aspired,
Yeah.
aspiring entrepreneur in that way. Okay, so what would you say to them? Because there's a lot of things that you share about your journey to become a doctor. I can pull them up, but I'd love to kind of hear what you say before I
Yeah,
share
I kind
with
of want to
you
hear what
what I
you say
heard.
too. I want to hear what you
Yeah.
heard. I think what has worked for me always, I always saw myself as a gut instinct person. I my gut is going to tell me, is this the thing I should be doing or not? Is this the person I should be involved with or not? Is my heart has to be in it in order to really go all in. And so I think that you have to be careful because if your gut instinct is off because of other factors, and I know I'm being kind of vague, but if you don't really know who you are and you haven't spent the time to kind of go inward and figure out who you are and what works for you, then you may kind of end up on a little journey over there tangentially, which by the way, at 54 and a half, I can tell you those things are supposed to happen. So I think we've heard a lot. I feel like in the last year or so, it's all about failure now, right? It's not about achieving, it's about failure. But it's about lessons. It's about lessons and being open to the lessons. So that's number one. So doing some work. And for me, it has been journaling, writing, talking to other people, therapy, meditation, 12 steps. Seriously. So those have been ways I kind of can peel away all the external and what is going on with me. And sometimes that means stripping away a lot of stuff and really detaching and letting go of things that I think are important, whether it's attributes, activities, characteristics, projections, how I'm going to be viewed. As I've gotten older, and you probably are going to hear this from other people or probably have, like what I think you think really doesn't matter. It really doesn't. Like, I can use it against myself if I would like to, or I can use it to prop myself up if I would like to. But honestly, what's going on with me is the most important thing. So that's really numbers 1, 2, and 3. Because from there, you can start to really generate what do you like to do? What is it that gives you joy? What is it that scares you? What is it that you are looking at that you don't think you can do? Where is it that you are not enough? Where is it that you are too much? And that can help you start to build a roadmap. But honestly, a lot of it ends up being, for me, getting quiet, because I tend to, otherwise I say yes to a lot of stuff. I get involved with a lot of things. There's a lot of noise. There's a lot of story. I think looking at yourself and looking at what is the story that you tell yourself consistently from the time you were a kid, from the time you can remember. What is the story maybe you learned from your family, or, whatever. Maybe your ancestors have a story that you're carrying too. It's very psychological. It really is. And to me, it's very spiritual. It's a spiritual journey. And I think that people don't always talk about that necessarily explicitly, but there's no other way for me to understand it. I mean, like I said early on, people were telling me like, oh, this isn't, basically they were telling me without me understanding it until now, this isn't about you. Not that we don't appreciate you or we don't have gratitude for what you're giving us, but this really isn't about you. It's about something much bigger. So for me too, when I
Your
start
parents
getting,
taught you that? Your parents taught you that?
no, not at all, not at all,
No.
not at all.
Who
My,
taught you that?
No, I love my parents. They're amazing, but they're like from the 50s. It's like a whole different thing. I will tell you though, I did learn from my parents that you are like, and I talked about this a little bit jokingly, but you are a very lucky person. You're very privileged to have been born into the body you were born into the life you were into, and you owe it to others. You owe it to others to share. I definitely got that message, so, but it wasn't so much about like God or spirituality or anything like that. It definitely wasn't talked about in my house. For me, having spirituality and having a higher purpose is really important. And I think when when I find myself getting really activated, and I want to say this to other people, if you're like that is not the time to do anything or make any decisions at all. It's the time to just notice it and say, oh, okay, wow. And whatever works for you, whether it's breathing, whether it's drawing, whether it's getting quiet, whether it's giving that away to God or whatever you consider deity, spirituality, the universe, energy, I don't care. That works for me. And then I can kind of drop back into myself. I know it sounds very airy fairy, but it's really the only thing
No,
that's
not
worked
at
for
all.
me.
This type of conversations, happens all the time on my podcast. That's actually precisely the reason why I want to bring entrepreneurs like you who have accomplished a lot at the same time. I want to normalize this type of conversation because in my mind, we make what we are. So if our internal is chaos, whatever you make is going to be chaos. If not now, then sometime down the line. So ultimately, we make what we are. So the first
100%. And it's kind of what I'm saying. What I'm saying is if you're not being true to yourself, you're going to have a big life that is not true to you. And you may find yourself very unhappy and wondering why. Well, that's because you really weren't being true to yourself. So I'm going to tell you a little story. In my mid 40s, I've always been a very ambitious person and I wanted to be successful and I wanted to have a lot of stuff and do a lot of stuff. And I always had this purpose and I felt like I wanted to share, but I definitely wanted a lot because I think wasn't getting something. And what I wasn't getting was I wasn't getting me. At 47, was diagnosed with breast cancer. Out of the blue, right? I was young, like what? How did that happen? And so that little brush with mortality changed a lot of things for me because even though I was skirting around a lot of the stuff we're talking about today, I really wasn't owning it and I wasn't into it completely. And I just had a very complex relationship with it. I had a lot of fear about it. I think I had a lot of shame around it. And I was afraid.
When you say it, breast cancer or death?
No, about like who I really was and wanted to be and what I needed to be. Yeah. And everything changed. Everything changed. I had to shut things down because I had to take care of myself, which was not something that I was very good at. I was very good at taking care of you and everybody else, but not myself. And a lot of things changed. My marriage ended. The way I approached my work changed. And I did a lot of work on myself. And it was really, really painful, really hard. And I actually, all these other things that I do, I stopped doing pretty much all of it for a couple of years. And I had to really let go of like what I thought I was going to be in this world, or who I thought I was supposed to be, or, oh my God, I'm going to lose momentum. Nope. None of that happened as I got back to who I am. And then all sorts of things started opening up to me that were much more aligned with who I am and what I really wanted to be doing.
Sorry, pause for a second.
Yeah.
What did you do to get to the center of who you really are? Because I asked that question
Yeah.
specifically because this is the time, a lot of chaos, external, internal, marriage, relationships, all of it happening at the same
Yeah.
time, right? So people are going through this.
Well, I had to
Given
grieve and
something
mourn.
practical that they can.
So when my marriage ended and I was recovering from breast cancer, because it kind of happened around the same time, I had to grieve all of this stuff that I had to grieve this person that I thought I was. And I did very specific work. This is where 12 step really worked for me. I mean, I don't want to get too deeply into it. I don't have a substance abuse problem. It was more of a process issue for me. And that really helped me a lot. But I think really that process, the 12 steps are really amazing. I mean, basically the process is what I'm talking about. It's admitting that you're powerless, looking at yourself in real time and actually owning up to the shit that you've done, and also giving yourself a break and apologizing to yourself for what you put yourself through, and letting go of that person, that shell that was acting a certain way, and then having to rebuild. And I mean, I really I basically did my work, took care of my kids, and like read, meditated, exercised, talked to a very small group of people. A lot of people in my life that really weren't necessary fell away. And a lot of my media stuff, I didn't do any of that for like 2 years at least. And I was very attached to that, right? I had a lot of like TV stuff and like people, oh, we wanted you to do this television show, blah, 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 blah. People blowing smoke up my ass. Sorry. Like, and I was just like, ugh, like I had no energy for any of it. And I realized like, that's not even like, what is it that I want? So really like I got really quiet, and sometimes it's really uncomfortable to be quiet because then you're left with yourself. You don't have the distractions. So that is what's happening right now. This is why a lot of people are freaking out. There's no distractions of activities and stuff and things and people. And it's like, it can be like scary. But if you can just get quiet with yourself and realize like, that's okay. Quiet is okay. Uncomfortable is okay. Grief is okay. Anger is okay. All these things are okay. Feel them. For me, what worked was feeling them, writing about them, processed it for me, talking about it with, people, certain trusted people worked. And then just kind of being open to like, okay, what's going to happen next? Let's see. And it's pretty crazy how many things opened up to me that made much more sense, including a much better relationship.
I love that. First and foremost with yourself, right? Be at peace.
100%. The relationship with me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's the most important, because no matter, I guess, with this podcast, the kind of friends I have, a lot of people are, have a lot of admiration for them, and then all the staff, and they're the boss, the leader, they're respected, all these things. But they tell me, most of them, almost all of them tell me that, well, at the end of the day, all those things are nice, but they're fleeting. Because those things, the success, the accolades, the magazine covers, the interviews, all these things, when you close your eyes, you're by yourself again. So whatever doesn't suit well with you are still there.
100%. That's like when you like decide you're going to move to another city to start over. Aren't you the person going to that new city? I mean, like if you don't get okay with you, you're going everywhere with you. I used to, when I was a resident, I had a teacher, a physician, Dr. Leo Lagasse, and he was a really outstanding surgeon. He was a GYN oncologist, so he's a cancer specialist for women's cancers. And he was a known philosopher. Like, he was an incredible surgeon. The surgeries were so long, like hours and hours long. And he would start kind of getting into it with the residents and ask you all sorts of like personal kind of philosophical questions. And I remember he said this to all of us all the time. He was like, what do you think? Do you think that my patients on their dying, on their dying breath, are they worried about like the, golf course or the extra car, or the beach house or the trips? No, they're worried about their family, their loved ones. Like, they don't care about the jewelry and I mean, he didn't give you the answer, but he dealt with a lot of women dying of ovarian cancer.
Mm,
And I was, a young mom. I was like 20, whatever. I was probably like 30 when I met him.
mm.
And, not like couldn't have thought that myself, but hearing that from a man much older than me who was very accomplished and very admired, and just bringing it down to the brass tacks, like what's really important,
Mm,
you know, was a good thing to hear at that point. But,
mm.
you have to figure that stuff out for yourself, honestly. And sometimes you have to like put yourself through some bullshit and pain to get there,
So, quick
unfortunately.
question, actually. You're at a unique position where you get to see a new life,
Yeah.
literally being born,
Yeah. Yeah.
and you care for them throughout their different stages of life. And at some point during your medical career, probably seeing people also pass as well, right? So you're at a very unique position.
Yeah. Not as much. You'd be surprised. Not so much, thank God. Poo poo poo. But yes, of course, life threatening illnesses, people being very, very sick, people losing pregnancies,
Do you
hmm
feel that that gives you more of a perspective? It makes it, it's obviously, how do I articulate it? It's challenging to go through the human life roller coaster ride for everyone. It doesn't matter
Yeah.
who you are, how rich, how poor, it doesn't matter who you are, right? Just different. But you're at a unique position where you can literally see the beginning, the middle, and the end.
Yeah.
So do you feel like that makes it a little bit easier since you have more of a meta perspective? This is
I don't know if I don't think it makes it easier, but I mean, but I think you have to be really careful because I think I definitely do have a different perspective because I'm dealing with like intense life issues on a daily basis. And one of the ways that people survive that, oh, oh my goodness, sorry. My
sorry.
thing just that's my I'll be back. My camera went cuckoo. Sorry. One of the ways that we survive that is dissociating. So because if we're too in it, we're not going to be able to function the way
Mm,
we need to function as the doctor, as the authority, as the repository for people and their
mm,
strong feelings and experiences. But on the other side of it, it's really true. It's like I forget sometimes that my perspective on life is very, very different because I have contact with this stuff. I definitely have contact more with the beginning of life and the end of life,
mm,
but I do have contact with the how delicate it all is and how fragile it can be. And that gives me a different way of viewing things. Maybe I appreciate things a little bit differently. I'm kind of a glass half full person. I'm noticing it a lot with my colleagues in terms of how they're responding to the COVID thing. It's interesting to see like who's just freaking out, honestly, and like super negative about everything, and I mean, and there's a lot to be negative about. There's a lot of bad stuff going on, actually, and who's able to sort of balance it. It's an observation. It's not a judgment at all, because a
for
lot of these
sure.
people are people I love, but I'm like, I can't read every single article about this. Like, I pretty much know what's going on.
For
Like,
sure.
I don't, you know,
I don't know if
so.
you ever, so I don't know if you ever heard this quote. It goes like, adversity reveals our character. I
Mm-hmm.
don't know if you have had any psychedelic type experiences before. You're a doctor, so you don't have to answer that question.
I don't care. Like a long time ago, nothing recent.
Okay. But essentially, from my point of view, adversity is basically you're sitting in ceremony, right? And it reveals all of your light, all of your shadows as well. It's an amplifier. It's a multiplier. So the way I see it is, people just do more of what they normally do.
Totally.
Totally understandable, totally human, totally cool. It's just, like, okay, so what an opportunity for us to actually work on our own stuff, right? So
1,000%. And like I said, working on stuff is hard. It's a lot easier to run around crazy, busy, racking up podcasts and money, whatever, not that they go together, than it is to sit still and be quiet and feel whatever is going to come up. Look, we could have another 3-hour conversation on this one, and this culture certainly doesn't value that. That's one of the reasons we're having so much existential angst. Definitely there's real stuff. People are losing their livelihood. They're in fear financially. People are sick. But I think a large part of this and like the protesting and stuff is more about like fighting for this idea of what we are, which is like go, go, go. Like, is that, do we need to be like that? I mean, and I'm saying that from the privilege of my home. Okay. So, but there's some like, existential angst going on here that, like you said, is just being revealed by the amplification and the intensity of the experience.
Mm.
It
I
was
want
there.
I want to talk to you, bring back to the more practical stuff.
Hmm.
So you were going through a middle of your own crises. You got still, right?
Oh, well, it got forced on me.
Right. You took care of what you needed to take care of, and you
Yeah.
got still. And you said you talked to trusted friends. What are some of the criteria that you use for your trusted friends? Because one could imagine you had thousands of acquaintances, thousands of
Yeah.
Facebook contacts, right?
Yeah.
Thousands of people who admire you. How did you pick your friends who you truly wanted to hold close during that time?
Well, like you said, people kind of showed themselves. It became clear who was there in different ways, and so that really helped me identify who I was gonna rely on for different things. And then I actually, and I made some new friends who were also kind of going through things that I could relate to. Because one of the things that's even happened in the beginning of this whole situation with the pandemic was that, very early on, I really only wanted to talk to certain close friends of mine that are also physicians because they just understood it in a different way. And like what we were going through was very different. It's not so much the case now, but I think there were people that I had shared experiences with that I knew that they had gone through crises. My cousin is an example. And, I'm actually like, I can talk forever, but I'm actually a really private person. I tend to not share. And I learned that a lot about myself during this whole thing, which is that I don't really like being vulnerable. I mean,
Mm,
that would seem obvious to someone looking at me. I'm a doctor. Like,
mm,
it's not about my vulnerability. It's about yours.
mm. Can
I'm
I ask you a
good with
question?
yours.
Can I ask you a question about that?
Yeah.
No, that's a really beautiful frame that you just distinguish. Because at the one hand, you're a leader. You're there to provide
Hmm.
sovereignty and certainty for you, the people who depend on you, who
Yeah.
don't have certainty, right? So I understand that. At the same time, my experience of you is being very open and welcoming and open heart. So it doesn't quite compute for me when you say I'm a very private person. You know what I
It's,
mean?
I think, the most deep stuff. Like, I've learned, like, this conversation, I've learned how to have this conversation in a really real way. Like, there's certain things that I'm saying that I definitely wouldn't have said even 2 years ago. But I've learned, and some of this is just life experience, some of it's just where I am. I don't know, that it just makes more sense for me to be out there about who I am. And if our conversation is about me revealing what has worked for me and inspiring other people to do so, and then giving them some practical tips,
Mm,
then that has to be part of it. Because I will tell you that I think that I'm a much better doctor, I'm a much better teacher, I'm a much better employer,
mm,
I'm a much better partner, I'm a much better parent, I'm a much better friend when I'm able to be vulnerable in that way and
mm.
create some real intimacy, actually. Because otherwise, it's like I'm just showing you this shell, and that's
Shiny,
also
shiny,
unattainable.
veneer,
Right,
beautiful, perfect. Yeah.
right,
Mm,
exactly. And some of that, I think, was like me being, I mean, I really am authentically warm and I'm interested in your story and I want to make you feel welcome. That's not real about me, but that's also can be a shield a little bit.
mhm, mhm.
So, because I'm in control, if I'm doing that.
Okay, so do you mind practicalize that for people who are listening? Practicalize
Ooh,
it for me, right? So
that's a
me,
hard one. I don't really know. I
so
mean,
let me set up the context for a little bit, then you can help with
mhm.
that question, right? Because in my mind, there's a spectrum. There is the I won't share everything, and there's the I'll share everything. TMI,
Right,
right?
right,
And
right,
like
right, right, right,
irrelevant things, and doesn't matter. They're
right.
just like the way I articulate it, not so artfully, is emotional throw up. They just like
Yes.
bleh, everything, right?
Yeah.
So I love to use the yin yang sign quite a lot
Mhm.
on podcasts. So the answer is somewhere in the middle, right? Not
Yeah.
over here, not over here, right? So how do you discern? All right, I'm being open about who I am as a human being, not a perfect identity, right? But at the same time, I'm also here as a leader. So there's a sweet spot somewhere in the middle. Can you share with us how you think about what
Well,
to
it
and
kind
what not
it
to?
it goes back to what I was talking about, which is that internal censor, because if now I feel more comfortable with being vulnerable in certain ways. And I think you have to have boundaries too. Like, it's not appropriate for me to talk to you who I barely know or on a Facebook Live about certain things. Like, that's not going to happen. Like, there are some people who might come on and do that and you'd be like, whoa, or maybe you wouldn't. I don't know. But for me, like, it's about boundaries, because there vulnerability and boundaries, that is the yin and yang. Okay. In my opinion, when we're talking about this. So practically, I mean, there isn't, like, I can't give you like the 3-step checklist to get to the perfect balance between boundaries and vulnerability. If somebody online, I'm sure I'm going to know, it's going to come up on my feed for sure. But somebody is doing that, and I don't know what that is, because everybody has a different balance point. Everybody has a different place in which they are integrating those two. But both those things have to be valued. And if you're starting to feel super duper naked and uncomfortable, it might be time to tone it down. That's where the boundary is. Like,
Mm,
and again, it's a lot of it's just about practice. It's about trying and learning, and pushing it a little bit this way, pushing it a little bit that way, pulling it back. And it's not going to be the same in every single situation. Obviously, like, in a conversation with you, it's going to be, the balance is over here. In a conversation with an employee, it's going to be over there. In a
mm,
conversation with a patient or an administrator, or, with a friend, it's just they change. Those are moving targets. But to me, boundaries are super, super, super important in that. This
mm,
doesn't mean that you give it all up. That's not protecting yourself. That's not taking care of yourself.
mm, mm. I think it was Brene Brown. She said, um,
Big fan.
vulnerability, huh?
Big fan.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So am I, yeah. Because she is how do I articulate it? She's the total opposite of how I grew up, right? She's all about owning the shame and the guilt. And which is
Hmm.
great because I learn a lot from the way she articulate those very nuanced, difficult to articulate emotions, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And one thing that she said really landed for me is vulnerability is an earned privilege. No one
Yes.
to be vulnerable with everyone
Right.
at the same time because they haven't earned it, so to speak.
Exactly.
So I really like that. The way I will articulate it for myself is life is a roller coaster ride, right? Our biggest superpower comes from our biggest wounds. Now,
Mm.
when I actually have owned all of my guilt, all of my shame, all of my shadow, all of my wounds, and I come out to the other side and know all of my lessons, when I can own the lessons and the shadow, then I'm complete. And at that point, I can use that as a tool to teach, right, from my personal story. But
Yeah.
so that's for me what works. What doesn't work is when I'm still incomplete, when I'm still
Yeah.
in that that
Yeah.
low vibrational energy, negative energy, and then I can't quite own my accomplishment. Then that's what come off inauthentic. Because I've been thinking about this question a lot. That's kind of what I come to.
That's beautiful. That's really interesting. I took a storytelling class once, and the teacher, who became a good friend, said to us, a lot of our best stories are going to come from wounds, but the thing is, time to share that story is not while you're still in the wound, where the wound is fresh. It has to heal and scar over, and then you have learned something from it. You have a perspective on it. You're not so vulnerable in that area anymore, and your ability to share it now is a much more powerful tool, as opposed to the emotional vomit that would occur while you're still in it, which
Hmm.
isn't, like, that's the processing. That's not the time to share in a storytelling event. You know what I mean? It was very specific, but I think that that's true and that applies. It's kind of really the same thing that you're saying, you
Hmm.
know?
Hmm.
Yeah, beautiful.
Well, my friend, it's been an hour. Time flies very quickly. I
It
want to be
does.
super respectful of your time. So we had talked about a lot of different things. We talked about how you grew up. We had talked about how you learned that life is about contribution, about helping others. It's not about you. You had talked about what else we talked about? We talked about how you pick your majors. You're a rebel. You pick the life that you wanted, art history to psychology, and then somehow you landed up in medicine? I didn't actually ask you about that gap. I will leave it for another time.
Another time.
We had talked about medicine. Your teacher taught you that, hey, at the end of life, what do they think about? Do they think about their possessions, or do they think about what matters most in their life? We had talked about how COVID, how it impacted your personal practice, and looking forward how different hospital systems could is going to help navigate in this whole crisis. We had talked about also, what else did we talk about?
A lot of things.
Spirituality, we touched upon that. We talked about, right, we talked about doing transition time, doing pivot time, doing transformation time. What first to do? Self-care, and then do whatever you need to do to like meditate, to get still. And then we talked about how you pick your friends, right? So out of a wide gambit of everything that we talked about, what's one action that you want our listeners to take from this conversation?
Oh my goodness. I mean, I think if there's one actionable item here, it's the one thing that has been a through line for me probably for the last 20 years, which is my meditation practice. And I can't say that I do it exactly the way I thought I would, but having every single day a period of time that is still has been the thing that has had the most positive impact on me. And so if nothing else, if people can try, there's so many apps and things, and stop judging and stop talking about how you're making your list. That's okay. That's what's supposed to happen, but giving yourself, if you could do 20 minutes, great. But even just 5 minutes every single day of quiet breathing, really, it is a game changer. Stop
Any
being
specific
focused
kind
on
of
the,
meditation, by the way?
I mean, I have a mantra meditation, but I don't even do the same thing all the time. And I think the reason a mantra works is because it gives you that thing to pull you back when you are making your shopping list or you are starting to stress out about that situation. Okay, right. Let me go back to the mantra. That is the practice. It is a practice. There is no perfection. It's a practice. So getting kind of away from accomplishing anything with that, but just being in it and being present. For me personally, it's been a game changer. There's a ton of science to support it, a ton of science to support it. So that's perfect because that's my heart and my head experience with that.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. Now, for people who are listening, inspired by your story, inspired by the way you think, where should they follow you?
They can find me on I'm most active on Instagram, so it's at Ask Dr. Suzanne. They can find my website, The Dr. Suzanne. They can find me. I'm out there, and they can connect with me. And I'd
Beautiful.
love to hear.
Beautiful. Thank you, my friend. So appreciative of
Oh,
your time
thank you.
being here.
What a great conversation. Have a beautiful day.